Hello, Willowbrook family. Today's daily devo is found in 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 21. Now, I have a confession to make. When I was a little kid, I could be afraid of the dark. And it wasn't exactly the dark. It was those invisible monsters that lived under my bed. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would start to wonder, what was under there? Now, I wanted to go and run to my parents' room, but I didn't because I was afraid that if I did, some kind of creepy claw would go and grab my ankle. So I would cry and I would cry out and my dad would come. Now, fortunately, those days are gone. Most of us are not afraid of monsters under the bed anymore, but we are afraid of things like rejection and failure and not being good enough or thinking that God is disappointed with us. We think, well, I hope I'm doing enough for him to still love me. God's word in this passage is for people who feel that kind of worry. And the message is simple but life-changing. If you truly understand God's love, fear loses its power. Now, the book of 1 John was written late in the first century, likely from Ephesus. The churches that John was addressing were dealing with false teachers, early forms of what would later become known as Gnosticism. Now, John writes this chapter to let people know what God's love really looks like. So let's unpack it. The passage begins with love comes from God. And here's the first thing. Love starts with God, not you. That's foundational. Love is not something that you manufacture by being nicer or more patient or more spiritual. This kind of love is something you receive from God, and then you reflect it outward. Then next, in verses 9 through 10, John doesn't let us define love emotionally. He defines it historically. God showed his love by sending his son. And not just sending him, but sending him to die. God sent Jesus as an atoning sacrifice. Now that means sin was real, judgment was real, and Jesus fully dealt with both of them. You see, biblical love is costly, sacrificial, and rooted in the truth. And we need to be reminded, God didn't love you because you cleaned yourself up. He loved you while you were still broken. Now, moving on, the passage makes this important point. Love is meant to be seen. You know, the early church, they didn't have stages and platforms and podcasts and social media. So what made Christianity spread like it did was that people loved differently. Now, people may never read a Bible, but they read how you love. And then next, as we unpack verses 13 through 17, we see that love brings assurance and not anxiety. John says that we know we belong to God because the Spirit lives in us. Now, when we confess Jesus as the Son of God, we rely on God's love. And that word rely matters. It means that you lean your weight on something. Christian confidence isn't built on spiritual performance. It's built on trusting God's love. And then we get to verse 18, which is at the heart of the passage. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Now, John says fear has to do with punishment. In other words, fear whispers to you, what if God really hasn't forgiven you? Perfect love drives out that kind of fear. Not because judgment isn't real, but because Jesus already faced it for you. Fear fades when we understand grace. Now, John closes this chapter with one powerful challenge. You cannot love God and hate people. Now, this doesn't mean Christians are perfect, but it does mean that love is the direction of a life that has been redeemed. If God loved us first, we now love differently with others. Love is not just something you feel in worship. It's something that you live out in real relationships. So, back to when I was afraid of the monster under my bed, and I would cry, and my dad would come in my room. You know, his goal wasn't to argue and debate with me and shame me for thinking that there was a monster. My fear faded as soon as the light came on and I heard him say, "I'm here." He didn't have to move the bed. He just moved my heart. And love filled the room because I trusted him. And that's what God's word is saying to us. If you've trusted Jesus, fear no longer gets the final word. God's love does. Have a great day in the Lord, Willowbrook.